of Capital Program Oversight Committee. Could I have the approval of the minutes for the December meeting, please? All those in favor? Committee work plan, Craig Stewart.
One change to the work plan from this month is they will do a presentation on positive train control from the Long Island Railroad and Metro North. Also, if I can, I'd like to take a moment to introduce our new Director of Office of Construction Oversight, Mr. Mike Weatherall. Mike may look familiar to some of you because he comes to us from New York City Transit, where the past 3 years he's been the Vice President and Chief Mechanical Officer for the Department of Subways. Prior to that, he headed up the FTA's Project Management Oversight Consultant team, whose function is very similar to the MTA Independent Consultant. If you're welcome, Mike, thanks.
Okay, we're now going to have a presentation on positive train control. Before we get started, I think it'd be fair to say that although we have talked about positive train control for quite a while at the MTA, either at the agency level, Metro North Long Island Railroad, or at CPOC, it probably has increased sensitivity and visibility as a result of the accident December 1st at Spuyten Duyvil. It's more than a legislative mandate that we must meet. It's an important requirement if we are going to do all that we can do to be able to safely and effectively control train movements, especially the enforcement of civil speed restrictions. So we'll have that presentation today, and I can tell you that it's most likely we're going to have on a quarterly basis an update as to where PTC is at both railroads and its continued rollout so that we can get it implemented as close as possible on most of the system in time for the deadline of December 2015. Helena?
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you for that kickoff on PTC. I would like to introduce, of course, I work very closely with this with Metro North, Howard Permit, and with both of us are our staffs, executive directors of PTC, Chris Calvagna at Long Island Railroad and Wayne Staley at Metro North. And we can go to the first slide. As the chair indicated, Congress did pass a law. It's more than a law. It is a safety requirement. It was passed in October 2008. And while Congress did pass the law in 2008, the FRA completed the implementing regulations in January 2010, 15 months later. During that time, we developed specification to retain the expertise we needed to develop a spec for system integration. And just as we highlight on this slide, an approved PTC system must be capable of preventing train-to-train collisions, overspeed derailments, injuries to workers as a result of a train in a work zone, and movement of a train through an improperly aligned switch or a stop signal. If you turn to the next one, I'm going to ask Chris Calvagna from Long Island Railroad just to give you an overview of the complexity of the PTC system design.
Thank you, Helena. Well, this slide depicts the basic PTC system design we're going to be implementing to ensure safe train operations across shared railroad territory. For instance, Amtrak traversing Long Island Railroad traversing Amtrak. The FRA requires the PTC systems to be interoperable. As a result, and also because Amtrak has implemented Access 2 as their PTC systems, the Northeast Corridor has adopted the same technology in implementing to be interoperable. Access 2 is an overlay to, it's hard to tell from here, but there's cab signaling down at the bottom traversing through the rails to the train, and that's existing on Long Island Railroad and Metro North territory today. And Access 2 consists of the first 4 subsystems listed on the slide to the left, the onboard, wayside, back office, and communications. Long Island Railroad and Metro North will also be implementing a 5th subsystem called the Railway Worker Protection System, and this is to enhance greater safety along the right-of-way for our right-of-way workers. To briefly describe the subsystems, the wayside subsystem monitors the status of switches and signals located in the signal bungalow down to the bottom right of the slide, and provides that information to the onboard subsystems for processing and enforcement if necessary. The interface between a wayside and the onboards is through a radio communications network depicted by the yellow communications line there. The PTC also has a back office subsystem consisting of safety servers. The main function of the safety servers is to manage and implement and distribute temporary speed restrictions. The railroads also have a data network which ties all the subsystems together, listed in the right here in the middle. The railroads will also be using the Access 2 design, which includes transponders in track, and those are used for permanent civil speed restrictions and other functions. And to describe what PTC system does a little more detail, I'll turn it over to Wayne.
Thanks, Chris.
Sorry, this thing of the cab signal through the rail, can you go back one? What is, it literally, it's a connection through the metal rail and the metal wheels into the car that controls speed?
Yes, there's a code that goes out through the rail and there's a pickup coils that hover above the rails that pick up the signal and translate it into the cab. That's existing today.
And is that capable in itself of controlling the speed of the train, or does it just communicate with the driver?
The next slides will actually give you a
okay.
little bit more detail on that.
Mark, one of the things, traditionally when railroads started and they put signaling, you had fixed track circuits. And the fixed track circuit designated whether or not there was a train in that track circuit. And if it found a train in the track circuit, by way of an electrical signal, you had either red, yellow, or green designation on a stand post, like a stop sign. Cab signaling means you bring that display inside the cab. So you actually are transmitting much of the same information. Functionally, you can have higher levels of functionality, but the idea of cab signaling is it's in the cab, it's displayed no matter where the train is, versus wayside at fixed points along the system. But they're both fixed track circuit signal systems.
Two questions. Do you have wavelength now to do this? Do you have broadband or anything for that?
Spectrum.
Spectrum?
Yeah, we've procured Spectrum. Long Island Railroad is fully covered. It's complete territory, and Metro North is missing four northern counties for Spectrum right now.
That's not the existing signal system. That's not the existing signal system. That's for PTC. The existing signal system does not need Spectrum.
Is you transmit the signal into the cab. Does it have the ability to shut off the train or just give a colored signal or the like?
You talking about the cab or PTC?
Cab signal.
You're talking about PTC, right?
No.
Can I make a suggestion? Let's go through the presentation. You'll see some of these questions answered. If not, come back and ask the question.
Okay, to answer some of your questions about the existing system, cab signal, and what PTC, the law requires, what these slides are intended, and hopefully they're not too complicated, a little bit hard to see some of the text up there. But the cab signal system comes through the rail into the cab. There's another component on board the train called automatic train control. This is the subsystem on the train today that can apply the brakes and works in conjunction with cab signal to control or enforce the speed of the train today. The top portion of this slide indicates the basic building blocks for the cab signal. To the left, there's a bracket that highlights a typical signal block. The railroad's divided into blocks. There's the next symbol is the train. That's the train that be moving along. And the other brackets represent a progressive, continuous downgrade of permission, if you will, up against the stop signal, which is located to the right. So as that train progresses from the left to the right, it progressively gets an alert and downgrades the speed of the train up to approaching that signal at 15 miles an hour. And that happens today on both railroads, known as the cab signal with ATC system. What the cab signal with ATC does not do, and where the PTC portion functionality gets added is in that first white box where we are going to be adding protection against passing a stop signal. So when the train gets within about 70 feet of a stop signal, the PTC function will engage and hold the train at that point, not allowing the train to move until conditions ahead improve such that it gets a better indication, the signal gets displayed, the cab signal moves up until something else changes, and then it will allow the train to move forward. So that's one of the functionalities that doesn't happen today, but will be added with PTC when the whole system is done. In addition, the switch that's shown in that interlocking up there where you can change tracks, today cab signal enforces movement over that switch. If that switch were in the wrong position, the cab signal would be the most restrictive and would slow the train down in advance or before that switch. The next middle of the page represents protection against train-to-train collision. Here we've got two trains. There's the one on the left and the one on the right. And the train on the right, let's assume he stopped for some reason, broke down, etc. The following train will once again get a progressive downgrade of cab signal up to that train, and then be have his speed enforced, and be approaching that stop train at 15 miles an hour. That happens today. That's the function that's out there today, and that's done again with a cab signal with ATC. Sometimes you'll hear us refer to ATC or ASC, the automatic train control or automatic speed control. It's synonymous. Both railroads use a different little phraseology there. The bottom left represents what would be a spite and dival curve, if you will, where the train is at the bottom pointing upward and is going to be going through a right-hand curve. Today, the maximum authorized speed that's in there is whatever cab signal rate has been designed into that, and we don't enforce the civil speed. This is an example of a civil speed. And the white box on the left, when we add PTC, those speeds will be enforced over top of whatever cab signal is in the cab. The next description on the right, bottom right, represents a roadway worker out there. It kind of looks like a little Egyptian, I guess, but it wasn't. That's the way it came out. When we have an employee or a roadway worker out on the right-of-way, the system where we will be putting in the RWPS, Roadway Worker Protection System, will permit that worker to utilize a laptop or some other wireless type device to actually put a restriction approaching his work zone. And this can be done remotely. It can also be done locally, but it provides that protection for the worker himself, so that any train approaching his work zone will actually be enforced to stop before that train arrives at the work zone, until such time as that roadway worker removes the restriction, and then the train will be allowed to proceed at the speeds that are appropriate. Hopefully this has helped answer some of the questions in terms of the cab signal relationship and the PTC component. They're fixed. The train receives fixed signals, if you will, through the rail, and they correlate to fixed speed positions in the cab. There's a one-to-one correlation, and it's one speed versus another speed. It's not. There's a color. There's a fixed speed that there's a light inside the cab that's associated with a fixed speed, whether it's 35 miles an hour, 45, and then there's a speedometer needle that will line up to those.
To reiterate, if the motor person is incapacitated, it will stop the train then, if the person exceeds the speed, or slow it down at least, right?
It'll put the emergency brake on, yes. And that's part of the enforcement component of cab signal today, and also the other pieces for PTC that'll come down the road.
The way it actually works is the command changes in the in-cab signal. The engineer has a period of time that he or she has to react to. If they react and take a full service brake application, they don't get a penalty application. If they don't respond with a full brake application, the train will take over and bring the train to a stop. It will bring the train to a stop, and it has to be reset. It doesn't just let it go below the speed, right?
Right.
You get it effectively tripped. You will be brought down to a stop condition.
Okay, moving along. Part of what I just described is represented in that first bullet with regards to the speed, safe braking, and train separation. I want to kind of reemphasize a cab signal with automatic train control. Its fundamental design is to provide safe braking, and also up against the stop signal, but also safe braking up against the following train. Those are two of the key components in the design of the existing cab signal system. There are a couple exceptions. As Helena mentioned, when the law was put out and the FRA promulgated their rule, they allowed a little bit of flexibility for railroads to apply for an exception. And both railroads have done that. For Metro North, it's on the Waterbury branch, and it basically, because the very few number of trains we're going to run up there, or that we do run, we're below a threshold that allows us to apply for what's called a main track exclusion addendum, where we are not putting a cab signal system in today, but we're implementing a major portion of the rules for PTC in there. It's allowed because of the few number of trains. And I'll turn it back to Chris for the exceptions on Long Island.
Likewise at Waterbury, we have a mainline track exclusion addendum from Ronkonkoma to Greenpoint currently. And we also have territory that is non-ASC signal territory, which we developed a development plan for, which was approved by the FRA, so we can overlay access to over those signaling systems.
So the question then, the obvious question is, if by some terrific stroke of fortune, either lots of people moving into the respective areas, you want to increase the frequency on these branches, what is the threshold before you would have to install PTC on those branches? And would that be an impediment to improving service on those branches? Because you have to think now, wow, do I have to install PTC? Is that going to raise the cost of service on in these places?
Just to respond to that, we do think it would be an impediment if more people wanted to use our service, and of course we're in the business of wanting people to use our service. So we are moving forward with track circuit installation in a number of areas. In fact, a very important area was already approved by this board, Spionk to Montauk. We will bring in ASC signalization there so that PTC will be a natural overlay. The next important area that we have two important areas we've identified, and some of this is clearly got to be placed in our next capital program. We're trying to move on some design elements now, but one would be Ronkonkoma to Yaphank, with a second phase being Yaphank to Riverhead. We also have a segment that I'm going to let Chris talk about, involving Patchogue, and while it has track circuits, it's not at the level that we want it to be for the volume of service that we have. So I know Wayne's going to do just a reference to page 5, and then Chris to page 6.
Is the Amtrak track already equipped, or is it proposed to be equipped with the electronic? Amtrak. Hellgate.
Hellgate. Oh, okay.
They are equipping it.
They are equipping? Thank you.
Amtrak also is fully operational east of New Haven, from New Haven to Boston, and we're going to connect up to that to provide the interoperability when the trains come down on us, and then hand it back over at New Rochelle, and then down to Hellgate, back to Long Island, back to Amtrak. So there's a lot of complexity to get that seamlessly operational. Okay, the slide you have now kind of represents where Metro North is with our deployment of cab signal, and also we've highlighted on this drawing the curves under the emergency order 29. The heavy black lines represent cab signal with automatic train control. The Waterbury, the dash is our manual block territory. That's the way it is today. Over and west of Hudson, the Pascack Valley is currently cab signal equipped, and we are working actively with our ongoing project for the Port Jervis line, installing cab signal over there. And that will tie into the inclusion of PTC when that's finished. The colored ellipses, if you will, represent the approximate location of curves and one bridge that's completed under EO 29. At Bridgeport, we've got Jenkins Curve and Peck Bridge completed. Port Chester Curve's completed. Spuyten Duyvil Curve is completed. And it shows the three remaining bridges and two curves on the Harlem and Hudson respectively that are yet to be done.
On the Long Island Railroad side, this is the Long Island Railroad system map. As you can see in the lower right-hand corner, we have from Spion to Montauk, which is colored yellow. All the yellow is automatic speed control. However, that's being deployed currently. From Ronkonkoma out to Greenport, you notice the black line. That is our dark territory or our unsignalized area. The red areas are what's known as ABS or automatic block signaling. It's a non-ASC form of signaling. And the blue is control manual block, which is a non-ASC form of signaling, which we do have approval for deploying access to over those signaling areas. We do have plans, as Helena mentioned, to signalize from Ronkonkoma to Yaphank. We also are looking at going from Yaphank to Riverhead, and also looking at Babylon to Patchogue to upgrade that to automatic speed control. Yeah. Excuse me.
Ballpark guess as to when that could happen in the dark territory.
The Ronkonkoma to Yaphank is in our next capital program, followed by Yaphank to Riverhead in a program after.
What's the difference? What's the difference between what is there now between the red, blue, and the yellow? I assume, from what you're saying, the yellow areas are the highest safety features.
Yes, that's where we have automatic speed control.
Okay. So
Correct.
if the yellow is the highest safety features, then the red and the blue are less than the yellow.
Right. There's no speed control enforcement.
Okay. So what do we have now in the red or the blue to do whatever it is we want to do? Because we don't have yellow there, so we have something less than yellow. What do we have?
Just interject here. What we're trying to do with both of these slides is show you where we need to be with PTC is a
Right.
bar up here. Different portions of the system are different places, so you're going to have to fill those cups accordingly.
Right.
So the least filling is on the yellow.
Right.
The next least filling is the red, and the most filling are the blue and the black. Black has nothing, basically.
Right.
It's dark
No,
territory.
that right.
So you're just doing it totally by rule.
Right.
So that's the difficulty associated with this, especially with respect to, and you'll hear later, of when the completion date's supposed to be.
Right.
So if you take a look at this chart, and you'll see in a prioritized manner where you have control and where you can get the full PTC implementation, and where you see the yellow is where the most frequent train movements are, the highest densities of the system.
Right.
And that's the correlation. So that's we're providing this as a frame of reference.
No, I understand. Yes, I understand. But am I to assume that more work would have to be done on the reds and the blues to get to
Yes.
full PTC?
Yes,
than
you
has
have to
be done
fill
on the
more of the
yellow?
cup to get to that point.
That was my point. You have to get to
Right.
a level and then go above that.
Yeah, we do not have to install automatic speed control to get PTC because we were approved through a development plan to install access to over these signaling technologies
understand.
to give us
Okay.
PTC.
Okay.
Can I,
All right.
Go ahead.
so for the red areas, which is automatic block signal,
Correct.
that's still a cab signaling system.
No.
No?
It's not.
No,
It's
not cab.
wayside.
It's wayside signaling. So you have automatic
Okay.
or intermediate signals every so often.
Right,
Okay.
that's what I thought, okay.
That's why the contract's called an integration contract. You have to match up by segment what you're going to do to
Right.
get full
Right.
PTC.
Right, okay.
But just to emphasize, we can have a PTC overlay on the red territory. And it
Without cab signaling.
Without cab signaling.
And that's our plan.
PTC will work, yes, because we have other areas that we have a higher priority, since we have nothing. And we want to protect, future utilization of that service.
Because, I mean, PTC offers just as much as cab signaling does if you don't have cab signaling. At least, at least as much. So you don't have to, there's no point putting in cab signaling in a place where you have
Yeah,
just
but
the wayside.
Chris,
Right.
Is that true?
right now in manual block territory, you have no means of communicating between Wayside and the train. Is that correct?
Correct.
So you have to
And-
add
and-
that functionality to get to PTC.
That's right. Well,
But you're going to do it through Spectrum is what you're going to do.
Right. Well, yeah, there are elements of PT. You can't have full PTC in dark territory. So we're having PTC elements within the territory. For instance, you'll have the permanent civil speed restriction transponders, so that will enforce curves. Yeah, and you'll also have temporary speed restrictions that'll go through Spectrum that we've procured, and we'll be able to implement grade crossing warnings and the things like that.
Tom, you used the word you have to do it through the spectrum. And my question is, to what extent, if any, is that spectrum subject to being hacked, if you will, or the like?
There are, according to the CFR and following the CFR, there are rules we have to follow and things that have to be done to ensure that we have encryption.
Okay, and I'm going to pick up, here we have on slide 7, a reference to our joint venture with Bombardier Siemens. This is the contract that was approved in December. And in that contract, we have identified 5 key areas that we identify as risk to the schedule. And they are Spectrum, the research and development nature of PTC, the Amtrak interoperability protocols that must be developed. We must ensure that there's a GE radio that operates on the 220 megahertz. And we, of course, need a robust design and testing protocols. We are very focused on ensuring that we have pilot testing that will guarantee full functionality of the onboard, wayside, and back office functionality. And I'm going to just ask Chris and Wayne to highlight those points.
The Long Island Railroad pilot test areas are on the Port Washington branch and also part of Harold to test interoperability with Amtrak. They would traverse from line 4 all the way up through F, going up the Hellgate over 801 switch. So they'll be traversing our territory, we'll be traversing their territory, and that's where we'll test the interoperability limits. The rest of the territory will test our EMU service with M7s and speed control. The other pilot area we have is between Babylon and Patchogue to test the Access 2 overlay on automatic block signaling and also for our cab cars and some diesel locomotives. No, just the access on Long Island Railroad portion of the territory over 801 Stitch, and after that, it's back to Amtrak land.
The Metro North pilots, there's one in Connecticut from Bridgeport to New Haven. The intent there is to work out the details with the Amtrak interface at track speed, work out the yard interface, and also the complexity where we've got a bunch of interlockings tied together. It's a challenge to get that to work correctly in the new system. The second pilot is on the Hudson line between Terrytown and Croton Harmon. That's intended to test our third rail powered fleets, the M7s and M3, and also that will be a testing bed for the shops when they are bringing out the fleet to commission them.
May I, why are you not using one or another of the curves as a testing area, given that you've had, in one of them at least, 2 derailments?
We can simulate a curve in the system to do testing, even though it's straight track. We can set up our transponders if there was a curve, so we can effectively test the functionality on straight track. And it's a simulation, but it effectively does test that it is enforcing the speed.
Second question, to what extent, if any, is proximity to water, such as the Hudson River, a negative factor or potentially such?
You mean from a flooding point of view or anything? The transponders that are set out on the track, by design, have to work underwater. And if the train can run over it, if the water's not deep enough that an electric train can run over, the transponder will work fine.
And if water overflows and runs over it, is that a major job to replace?
If we're designing them correctly and we get the right product, we should not have to replace them.
Okay.
Okay, and next we're turning to, I think, slide 8, if you would. Yes, road worker protection system was not required under the PTC system when the regulations were completed by the FRA, but Metro North and Long Island Railroad have elected to include that, and Wayne has a description of it.
All right, the diagram you see in front of you represents the RWPS component that we'll be adding. In the bottom center, there's a representation of an employee in charge, and that's the employee will have a laptop or a handheld device in order to communicate to the central office to apply a block or a restriction. And as I mentioned earlier, this system, the RWPS system, utilizes the enforcement function of PTC to ensure that a train approaching a work zone, either on the track that the employee is on or an adjacent track, the RWPA system will utilize the enforcement to make sure that train is slowing down appropriately and coming to a stop at an appropriate location. That's a key component that that system is using. So we're leveraging the PTC system with an additional function that is illustrated here. I'm going to turn it back to Elena.
Okay. We wanted to give you just an update on the rail industry position, and I am very pleased to say that there's really a uniform commitment in the industry for identifying positive train control as a national safety priority. There was a meeting of the commuter rail executives on January 10th in Chicago with APTA representatives. Our chair represented us as well, and everybody really had a very good discussion about how important it is that we move forward, and everybody is emphasizing how important PTC is as a safety priority. And there was a uniform agreement that we recognize that the industry is going to have challenges meeting the statutory deadline of December 2015. And the industry has adopted a position that supports allowing the Secretary of Transportation to have the authority. He currently doesn't have that authority, but we are asking that the Secretary of Transportation be given the authority to extend the PTC implementation deadline for individual agencies. So this would be on a case-by-case basis, and it would be only if the Secretary determines that there has been really a demonstrated good faith effort to achieve positive train control implementation. And there's a number of factors that were listed by the industry that would continue to demonstrate good faith to meet that deadline. But there is now, I think, a very important understanding of how the industry has to go forward. And we recognize that we will have some challenges ourselves in meeting a deadline and demonstrating that good faith. The next slide.
Eleanor,
Yeah.
just one quick question.
Sure.
To what extent, if any, will freight trains and freight cars carry equipment like CSS ATC so that they can tie into it, since they will be using your tracks and those of Metro North?
That is one of the important factors we identified when we talked about the risk analysis. The freights must comply with the host railroad, and there needs to be interoperability in order for us to communicate with the freights and the freights to communicate with us. I'm going to turn to Wayne, who can speak to the Metro North territory. We have to reach memorandum agreements with them, and they get filed with the FRA. Wayne, if you would address the Metro North territory?
For Metro North, we have an advantage because Amtrak already has access on the New England division. The same tenants that run over them run over us, so their equipment already is equipped with access too. It should be less of a challenge to get their equipment upgraded to our level. They're starting off with access to already, so there's a working group that will help the freights, our tenants, be upgraded so they're compatible with us. But they are down the road a bit already.
And Chuck,
We're a little bit more close. We only have New York and Atlantic operating on our territory, and they do run the automatic speed control, and they will be implementing PTC.
Chuck, if I might add, the Hudson line is different. So on the Hudson line right now, the freights that operate have cab signal, automatic train control. It's a pool of locomotives. West of Hudson, there are a number of, Wayne, I think it's like 6 or 7 different carriers west of Hudson, and those we'll have to reach agreement with as well.
CSX has it now?
They have the cab signaling now, automatic train control.
Are they equipped to take them?
They'll have to be. That's what Wayne was laying out.
Yes.
How much lead time do you give them to?
Once we get the system put together, it'll be a matter of upgrading their software, and we haven't really gotten to that point as to how long that's going to take, because we have to upgrade some of our system software too, and we're not far enough down the road to know how long that's going to take.
Okay, so we are currently in negotiations with the joint venture, and we are focusing on increased production of onboard equipment, increased production of wayside kits, and for Metro North, increased production in the transponders. The team is being led by Al Cosenza and John Kennard, along with Wayne and Chris. And we are meeting with them to evaluate the ability to increase these production rates. And we're also evaluating each railroad's ability to outfit the cars under a production schedule that would accelerate completion. And of course, as you'd understand, this means bringing the cars in, making sure we have the shop space, making sure we have the correct design for installation of the equipment on board each train.
If you look at it in each of these sentences, it says they will do it 16 to 20 months earlier for Harlem Hudson by October 17. When are they going to do it? I mean, earlier than what?
Our original completion date was December 2018.
Okay, so
It's the base schedule, Chuck.
so the word is after earlier is December 18. Is that what you're telling me?
Earlier than December 2018, that's
Okay.
correct. And in fact, I'm going to turn to Howard just to speak to the Metro North section.
Right, and so the other strategy that we can deploy on Metro North, and we have a bit of a head start because the M8 cars as well as the cab cars are being outfitted, came with PTC functionality, that we're looking to enforce the civil and maximize authorized speeds between New Haven and Grand Central by the middle of 2015. So that would be a major step forward, covering a significant volume of our customers. Then, as Helena mentioned, we're looking to install the PTC kits on the M7s, M8s, 16 to 20 months earlier on the Harlem Hudson line, and then completing all of the PTC on all wayside segments 12 months earlier. So that's the concept, and the map on the next page we'll get to in a minute, I'll explain that a little bit further.
Okay, and Chris, if you would review our early actions.
Basically, in the same wording applies there, 12 months earlier on the wayside to bring us to July 2017 rather than December of 2018. In addition, with the onboard kits, we have 836 M7 cars, 418 married pair or units that we have to install with PTC, and that's the majority of our fleet. So in focusing on that, we're looking to improve our schedule by 16 months to bring it into May of 2017.
Okay, this map, let me try to just explain this. The first color I wanted to show was the pilots, and so as Wayne mentioned, you see the pilots are in that green, both up at Croton Harmon on the Hudson and on the New Haven line. Then the red is showing when Wayside PTC will be fully deployed. And this is under, again, the accelerated schedule that Helena mentioned we're trying to negotiate right now. The important thing, what the red is showing and with different dates, is that the Wayside PTC will be installed in segments, starting with the New Haven line, and then those cars that have the PTC capability in them already will then be able to use the PTC because the fleets are coming on also on an incremental basis. You just can't retrofit the whole fleet simultaneously. So that's what the red shows. And then the enforcement of the civil speeds, which is a critical step. The green shows the first phase, which is the New Haven line. We're targeted by the middle of 15. And then the Harlem and Hudson line targeted by spring of 16. Elena?
And finally, you can see a map of the Long Island Railroad system with targeted implementation. We've identified where we're trying to accomplish, so wayside installation and onboard units installed with successive dates, 2015, 16, 17, and bringing us to a final position with all the installations that we had planned to do by 2017. Chris, jump in on our pilot sections again.
Sure. Just the sections in black, and then that's the way it's highlighted on the segments, are areas we plan to complete by December of 2015 to have installed. We take a large leap in 2016, adding 193 miles on a wayside, so we get a large bulk of our wayside done, and then completing in 2017. Although we have a final date there in December, actually most of it gets done by July. Which leaves the small sector of really Harold and then naturally much later GCT to Harold to be implemented.
So according to this map, the Long Island City branch is getting nothing, correct?
City branch.
That's not a bad. Right.
Okay, and again, we just wanted to close, we will be updating the committee periodically, quarterly. And we are very focused on trying to manage through the risks that this complicated technology does challenge us with. Again, you've heard us talk about spectrum issues, the research and development nature of the project. We have the completion of the Amtrak interfaces and interoperability of the GE radios. But most important, we think we can get the bugs out of the system and the wrinkles out by very good pilot testing. And that's the way the contracts were set up. We want to make sure that the back office functionality is clearly working, and the pilots include all of the back office so that we can do complete testing of the system before we try to roll it forward.
Can I ask you a crass question? Have you a ballpark idea as to the potential cost of this?
A billion here, a billion there, sooner or later we're talking real money, about $1 billion.
The only reason I'm...
No, it's about $1 billion.
Tom, the only reason I'm focused on it is I think the public, the media, and government leaders who provide funding on the federal, state, and local level need to know they have a responsibility to come up with the dough to help us do this.
Well, one of the issues is that has presented problems from PTC from the get-go is that it's an unfunded safety mandate with an unrealistic time deadline. We have modified our RIF application for East Side Access to still keep it in a $3 billion range, but instead of $2 billion for the project and about $1 billion for ancillary support projects, we're going to basically have about $1.2 billion for PTC.
Okay, thank you very much.
No, it's the way to go. It's the way to go. Capital Construction Company, Michael, progress report and East Side Access. As soon as you get ready, get started.
Okay. Let me just start by reviewing some of the stuff that we have completed to date. We have over $2 billion in construction that we completed in 2013, and just a and this is primarily the tunneling work that was in Manhattan and Queens. In Manhattan, we started tunneling at 63rd and 2nd, and we ended up at 37th Street, actually 36th Street. And we have overall dug about 7 miles of tunnels. Just to give you just a synopsis, we went from 2 tunnels at 63rd Street, and around 59th Street, we actually branched into 4, two to the left, 2 to the right. And this is a picture of how it looked when we have done that. Then we actually transition at 53rd Street now from 4 tunnels to 8. We have a crossover, a switch right there, and that goes from, again, from 4 to 8. And this is a picture of the location that we transition again. Then it shows the tunnels below, because these are actually ended up being one on top of the other. And what you see above there is actually the location where we have a switchover, so the upper level as well as the lower level can change, interchangeable use the 4 tunnels entering the cavern. And this is the lower level. Again, that's the same picture for the lower level. As we enter the cavern, we are entering with 8 tunnels. And these tunnels, if you look at a picture of the cavern, you can see them. It's a little hard to see them on the other end. This is about 1,200 linear feet. And then again,
what's the height of that chamber?
60 feet. It's 60, actually 65, but when it's done, it's 60 feet by 60 by 1,340 linear feet, the whole thing. These are the 2 of them, and this is actually shows you a typical cavern. And this is a cross-section that shows you that we are 160 feet below Park Avenue with the lower part, as well as we have an escalator that, we have 17 escalators there that actually are 180 feet long, 90 feet drop. And as overall, we have 19 elevators and 50 escalators overall here. And you can see the concourse there. The concourse is about 300,000 square feet by itself. As we move to 43rd Street, we're going now from 8 and to 4, and these are the tail tracks. and this is the 4 in one cavern, there are 4 in the other one, and then they moved in effect to 2. Overall, to remove the muck, we had to travel 3.5 miles to Queens. That's our only place that we can take it out, and that's where we had to deposit it. And since we're talking about the Super Bowl coming up, no, but it just is a 1.5 million cubic yards of muck. That's 75,000 trucks that had to move. When you put them one next to another, it's about 700 miles. So we go from New York City to Indianapolis. But this is what happens if you put the East Cavern in there. This is the West Cavern. This is the remainder. We're going to 700 feet, and this is the stadium. It's about 180 feet tall. So that's the World Trade Center, New World Trade Center 7 height. So it gives you a sense of how much muck we had to move. Other construction in Manhattan, we had the 44th Street, 50th Street, and 55th Street. The 40th and 50th Street, in excess of $110 million, will be completed in the first quarter. And 55th Street, we are completing right now the last of the blasting at the end of January. That's this week. The Manhattan South structure, that this is the continuation, actually the first contract to replace the CM012 was awarded in September, and as I presented to the committee, the work right now is moving ahead of schedule. In Queens, the interlocking, and we're Harold interlocking, that we have anywhere between 750 to 800 trains a day moving through. It's about a mile long. And here we have, in effect, dug 4 tunnels, and we've done it while the trains were moving and without impacting the Long Island Railroad, Amtrak, New Jersey Transit, and New York. And now this is a picture right here, I think, of the 4 tunnels. This is the picture of the underpass on Northern Boulevard. Just so you get a sense, we had to put in 313 catenary poles. They're 60 feet tall. They have a foundation of 40 feet dug by hand because it happens to be in between the rails. So this is not a simple thing to accomplish. There are many other things. We have 5 new railroad bridges, etc. But this is kind of a synopsis, and about 11 miles of new track that we're installing there. The highlights in Queens, the Plaza substation in Queens structure that is going on right now. The active Harold construction contracts, the CQ 05354 are going to be completed this summer, and the westbound bypass that is part of the regional investment, the contract was awarded and work started in December. And we are working with Long Island Railroad Amtrak to see, particularly with Long Island Railroad, to get extended track outages similar to the one that we had this summer so we can do our work. The next phase of construction is underway. We're moving from a heavily civil construction to more of a civil system construction, and some of the greater risks were behind us, so we're moving forward now to something that is much more in our core competency. The 3 months look ahead, we're going to be awarding the $850 million, this is 006 systems and the signal equipment procurement. Whoever attended the 2 meetings today at Long Island Railroad as well as the finance, this has been at least approved by the committees and is going to go to a vote to the board on Wednesday. We will be advertising about $500 million worth of work in February for the concourse finishes and the traction power procurement and the obviously Long Island Railroad track installation. And we have out a request for expression of interest for the caverns. This is the last contract to replace the CM012, and we expect to have in February interviews with the various contractors. With that, Tom.
If you recall, in 2012, I believe it was around May, infamously reestablished as a rebaselining of the contract at $8.245 billion in cost and a completion date of September of 2019. And by the end of that year, in December, even though we had repackaged contracts and looked at things in terms of how we could bring the project back into schedule and on budget, we found ourselves in a position where the rebaseline numbers and projections were not holding. And that was extremely disturbing. At that time, I was the interim executive director, and Fred was the acting chairman. But it was pretty clear that we needed to do something to try to find out what's going wrong. So I called for an independent supplemental review, and we wanted to bring somebody in with construction experience that was separate from the independent engineer and the MTA staff and the MTA Capital Construction Company to take a look at the organizational structure for the project. This is a project that in its genesis occurred or started when I was still president of Long Island Railroad in probably 1998, 1997, in that time frame. And we have the issue of budget and schedule has been continually eluding us. So I also asked for this independent review to do a constructability review in terms of, are we doing it the right way? Are we packaging the work the right way? Are we structuring it the right way? And what do we need to do to try to improve upon it? And do what we call a check estimate, which is not a detailed estimate as much as it is to review the estimate, to evaluate it in terms of its comprehensiveness, its completeness, and its accuracy. In April of 2013, the FTA, the PMOC for the FTA, did their own preliminary cost and revenue service date ranges. That was done by, basically overseen by the Region 2 staff of the FTA. I had a running dialogue, and I still have a running dialogue with the FTA administrator, who has just now been promoted, by the way, to undersecretary, but that's Peter Rogoff. And we agreed that we would share information based upon the review their PMOC did, as well as our independent review, and make sure that going forward, because they are one of the most premier stakeholders we have, that we'd get alignment in terms of what the schedule and budget would be for this project. Recognizing that we can't have, I'm probably going to stay away from the use of the word rebaselining, but we can't have adjustments that are as far out of line 6 months after we have projections. That review had been ongoing for the latter part of last calendar year, and we're now at a point in time where Rick Thorpe, who led that review, can comment on, the analysis of the organization and recommendations going forward as to how to take this project, and you'll hear some important things on that. The constructability review for the different difficulties associated with the work to be done in Queens or in the Herald area as well as in Manhattan. Participation in risk assessments. We need to make sure we're doing accurate risk assessments that are evaluating what those risks are and providing for appropriate contingency so we're not re-estimating and coming up with new numbers all along. And have a detailed review of the schedule and budget going forward. I think in some of the slides Michael projected here, he maybe didn't underscore it, but I will. In my 39-some years in the business, I've been racking my brain in terms of projects I've been directly associated with or indirectly associated with in terms of their level of complexity and size and scope. For those of you that ever had a chance to read history books on the building of the Panama Canal, the Path Between the Seas is one of the good ones. But in addition to tackling the job of malaria, one of the most difficult issues associated with the building of the Panama Canal was the issue of how much earth had to be moved. And they had to actually construct a railroad to move that earth. The amount of earth that got moved here in the tunneling aspects of this project and mining aspects of this project are second to none. Plus, it's not a core competency of ours, but you'll hear more of that in terms of what Rick will have to say. So, Rick, if you could go through the findings and recommendations of the independent review.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name's Rick Thorpe. I'm the CEO of a construction authority out in LA. I've been working on rail projects for about 40 years. The chairman asked me to come in, kind of lead an effort to take a look at several things. One, the packaging. We came in after the CM012 work came in over budget. To look at the repackaging effort that was going on, to look at the organizational structure, take a look at what was going on at Herald, and overall complexity of the project, and our final task, which we're still working on, but we've provided some general estimates at this point, would be schedule and budget for the overall project. So I'd like to take you through some of these initial findings that we had. I should also mention that we were supported by the Lewis Berger Group, so we had consultant support to help us out as we evaluated certain elements of the work. What you've heard from Michael and the chairman is the complexity of this project. It's probably and is, I believe, the largest infrastructure project going on in the United States right now. This one project is probably 5 of the projects that I've worked on in LA. If you take them all together, still wouldn't add up to the amount of work entailed in this particular project. As you saw from the pictures, the tunneling as well as the mining operation was a monumental task. Just amazing. The first time I walked in and saw those caverns, it was jaw-dropping, and I've been in the business again for quite some time. That is, I won't say risky from a safety, well, it is that too, standpoint, but mining, there's a lot of unknowns, can take quite some time. As Michael indicated, this was very, very unusual on this project. There was no access. Most of the tunneling that I've been involved with, you have a lot of access points where you can bring the muck out. In this particular case, it had to go all the way back to Queens before it could be hauled out. And that had an impact, I believe, on the delivery of the tunnel boring and mining. That being said, when we got in, that was done. We're now, or the project is now shifting into a finish work situation with CMO 5, 6, and 7 in the tunnel areas, followed by systems work. That is what I would say is I won't say again from a safety standpoint, but there's less risk involved. That is something that is just a matter of equipment, materials, and finish work. So that being said, we looked at the path forward, some of the repackaging. Did that make sense? Systems was a key because that is going to follow. But needed to get started as quickly as possible because there's a lot of procurement involved in it. We also looked at the difference now that the mining was over. We're shifting skill sets and needs over to a finish and systems. We were very concerned about Herald, the biggest interlocking in the United States, and trying to do work in that area. Bottom line is we have worked closely with MTA in evaluating their schedules for and the packaging for CMO 5, 6, and 7. They've made some adjustments that we recommended in 5 and 6, as well as some adjustments in the systems CS 179 contract that we think will prove beneficial to the project in the long run. We're continuing to work with MTA on the 07. That is going to be a huge project. You saw the caverns, the finish work with all those tunnels and platforms coming in. We continue to work with MTA on a schedule for that. That being said, based on where we are right now, we have provided MTA with a range for our thoughts, at least our initial estimates on cost and schedule for the project, and Craig, I believe, is going to talk a little bit further about that. But our conclusion is that of quite a few others is that the 2019 revenue operations date and the $8.2 billion is not going to be viable at this point in the project. There's other things that we're very concerned with and are still working on, and that is Herald. I think Michael showed you a little bit of that, but there is so much work, a little less than half of the total work of the entire project is in the Herald area. And because of that, you've got a lot of interfaces. In the Manhattan side of things now, contractors can work underground unimpeded. In Herald, you can't do that. You've got Amtrak, Long Island Railroad operating through there. You have to work when you have certain outages, primarily on weekends. You're very constrained in that area. And we're very concerned about the ability to maintain schedule because there's so many things outside the control of the contractor or MTACC, and I'll get into that in a little bit too. But before I do that, I'd like to kind of walk you through some of the recommendations from an organizational standpoint now that we're transitioning into the finish and systems. We came in and interviewed about 50 people to try to see what was working, what wasn't, in their opinion, working from an organizational standpoint. And I think what we found more than anything is that we need to strengthen the management level of the ESA organization, and we have provided some recommendations. We think there should be a creation of an executive steering committee, and I'll get into that when we look into the org chart that we're recommending. We think there should be a executive management team that meets at least monthly to go over issues relative to the project. We think there should be some management structure changes. I'll go through some of those. We think that reporting lines can be simplified. And finally, we looked at some of the business processes, change control, procurement, estimating. We felt that some of those could be strengthened and have recommendations. We have a Task 2, what we call Task 2 report, which is the organization and recommendations. It'll go into a lot more detail, and that should be coming out the end of this month. Let's go to the organization chart for a second, the one that we're recommending. First, I'd like to draw your attention to the upper right-hand corner, the one that's in the purple. This is a executive steering committee that we're recommending be implemented. The reason that we're recommending this is that this project needs the resources of third parties. It isn't entirely within MTA's control. And primarily Long Island Railroad needs to interface with this project. Amtrak needs to interface. We believe there needs to be a group at a very, very high level that can understand the issues, allocate the resources, or certainly have the ability to allocate the resources necessary to keep this project moving. And so we're recommending a steering committee that would be comprised of MTA, MTACC, Long Island Railroad, and Amtrak. Second thing I'd like to point your attention to is, I guess it would be an aqua or teal colored box called Senior Program Executive. We're recommending the creation of that position that would report to the president, and as you can see, that would comprise an executive management team. We're recommending that the chairman, the president, and the senior program executive meet on a regular basis to go over issues specific to the ESA project and to evaluate issues that can be resolved internally within the management structure of the ASA team. Third, we are recommending, if you see the three boxes below the senior program executive, again, strengthening the management level, the creation of an executive overseeing project support and controls, someone that would focus entirely on the completion of the heavy civil work. That's primarily the Manhattan structure stuff, but there's still some heavy civil work in Queens as well. And then a focus on the Herald, Queens, and systems startup and testing that will follow the heavy civil construction work. So we think those three management levels will help, again, strengthen the organization, provide focus on some very difficult and complex work that will be coming up. And as you can see below that, we also have layers where we have mid-level management in all of those, in the heavy civil, Herald, Queens, as well as the systems. Finally, we are recommending that the IEC be provided technical resources. They have their core team in place, but we found through this process, we brought on Clark Construction, it's a heavy civil contractor out of the Washington, D.C. area, to come in and work closely with MTACC on schedule and budget of some of these heavy civil works, and we thought that was very productive and very effective, and would recommend that the IEC have those technical resources when they need them that are beyond what they have right now. Those are basically our recommendations as far as moving forward. As I indicated, we still have a lot of work left to do. We're hoping to wrap it up sometime in the March timeframe. One of, again, the focuses that we still want to work on is what we call an operationally informed schedule for the Herald, which provides everybody's input from an operational standpoint, combining that with the construction and the heavy civil, trying to and evaluating the risk associated with that to come up with what we think is a realistic schedule for Herald, and then compare that back with the Manhattan system so that we can hone in on a final schedule and budget recommendation for the board. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my part of the presentation. I believe now that Craig will go into some of the work that has been done so far from an estimating standpoint, providing ranges on both the schedule and cost side of things. Craig?
Thanks, Rick. The charts in your handout on page 24 and 25, as well on the chart here, reflect preliminary project budget and schedule forecast that were developed by 4 different entities. The MTA Capital Construction, the Supplemental Independent Review Consultant, the MTA Independent Engineering Consultant, and the Federal Transit Administration through their oversight consultant, Urban Engineers. These charts reflect independent analyses by these groups. The goal in requesting these project budget and schedule forecasts was not necessarily to reach agreement, but to understand each other's findings, including the differences, especially as it relates to schedule forecasts. I'll touch on those differences in a moment. An important detail I'd like to bring to your attention on both this and the next slide are the figures. The figures include preliminary risk allocations noted by the light blue box at the top of each column. These represent a level of risk added to the project cost and schedule. These risk allocations stem from the assumption that the project will mitigate a medium level of risk, which is generally seen as a reasonable approach when developing such forecasts. You'll note that the FDA's forecast includes $463 million in rolling stock reserve that the FTA carries as part of its project cost, whereas other budget forecasts a more apples-to-apples comparison to the MTA's 2012 budget of $8.2 billion, which is not included in the reserve. Otherwise, you see that the four groups' budget numbers are quite close. A key factor in these across-the-board increases to the forecast budget since 2012 has been the breakup of CMO 012, Manhattan Structures work, into separate contract packages, as has been discussed at several CPOC meetings before. Turning to the next graph on page 25, we see schedule forecasts which indicate a 2-year spread. The difference among the groups are largely attributable to what we call variances, which in essence are the differences in the estimated cost and schedule requirements of a vast number of specific activities that comprise the project. For example, the IEC and the FTA forecasts are weighted by past performances on the project, given that in a number of instances contract work has not been executed within the anticipated timeframes. The idea being that perhaps it is prudent to take a conservative approach when projecting future contractor performance. On the other hand, the lowest forecast schedule belongs to MTA Capital Construction. Their forecast adheres more closely to the durations and requirements spelled out in the executed or soon-to-be executed contracts. In the next several months, we will work at refining these budget and schedule forecasts, and we'll continue to brief you at up-and-coming CPOC meetings. I turn it back to the chairman.
One of the things we've struggled with is how do we set a revised schedule and budget and not change it as frequently as we've been changing it. In the history of this project, you know where it started back in 1997, 1998, and how from a standpoint of cost and schedule, both have grown. What I want to make sure we're doing is we're providing a range at this time, which we need to become narrower, where we're putting a lot of pressure on the organization to manage to the lower cost and accelerated schedule timeframes, but at the same time taking into account what realistic risk we need to assume and how we can manage against it. I'm somewhat, and I underline the word somewhat, heartened by the fact that we're moving from what has not been a core competency of the MTA, which is a major tunneling and mining project, because we've done nothing in this order of magnitude at all. Most of this, but the closest thing we came to it was the new routes, the extension of the 63rd Street tunnel over into Queens, and it pales in comparison in terms of size and in terms of volume, but it's not necessarily a core competency of ours. Moving into an area where we're doing finish and systems contract, which we've done a lot of, so I'm somewhat heartened by that. But I think right now, for the time being, to have a range so that we are properly having the right amount of pressure on the organization to manage to the lower number and schedule, but at the same time recognizing what the risks are, we'll stay forward. We'll stay looking forward in that degree. From a standpoint of the management and organizational changes, they've been accepted. The senior program executive has recently been appointed. It's Mr. Bill Goodrich sitting in the back, and he's been very successful on the 2nd Avenue subway. Project controls and heavy civil program executives have recently been appointed, and we need to appoint the Harold Queen Systems Program Executive. I will set up the Executive Steering Committee. It will require a commitment of my time, but it's a commitment that's necessary. It's the largest project we have, and it's the most highly visible project we have in the MTA Capital Program. I've asked the supplemental independent review to finish up on the most critical reports by the end of March of this year, and we'll come back to the board on that. And we'll complete the project-wide and contract-specific risk assessments. It's only by keeping our eye on those specific risks and identifying mitigating factors so we manage to the low end of that spectrum, manage to the low end of the range in terms of cost and schedule, that it's going to get to be done. And there's going to have to be continual pressure on a month-by-month basis on the project team to be able to realize that. This is a difficult, challenging project, one in which, in the best-case circumstances, is delivery of, around 2020, and in some cases could be far beyond that. Any questions? Mr. Murdler.
Can I just clarify something? As I understand it, and I just want to be a little bit clearer about this, in or about 2012, we broke up a contract CMO 12 into 3 separate contracts because the amount of that contract far exceeded the budget. Am I right so far, Mr. Thorpe? And then,
Yes, that's
when we did that in 2012, we did it with knowledge at that time, stated at that time and thereafter, that the effect of that would be to increase the period of time it would take to complete and would provide a 2-year or so delay factor. Is that correct?
Yeah,
that was before my time. I probably ought to let somebody else handle that.
At that time, when we have done that, we're not entirely expecting that, although there was expected to be a delay. We had 1 year at that point that we were using as a contingency. As we moved forward and we started to break up the contracts, we realized that actually it will take much longer because of the way we are putting them together in order to effectuate a cost-effective way of doing it with minimum risk. So, yes, as we moved along, we realized that that will be longer, yes.
Because I saw notes of it in the 2012 minutes that we had made a projection would go out to 77 months instead of 40-some-odd months. But I have a second question. Does anybody have a ballpark idea as to what the cost would be of the superstructure of additional managerial persons at the various levels shown on your chart?
We didn't specifically estimate that. It was part of our recommendation. I assume that it would be handled within the project budget in these new
Okay.
numbers.
Let me just answer it. Number one, we do have it in the budget. And compare with our basically monthly cost, this is not at all a significant amount. It's just.
It's more of a restructuring than
It's
the
a
addition thereof.
restructuring of the positions, and we are adding some people, but we're adding 2 or 3 people, and in effect, as we're moving from one type of work to another, we expected to assign additional people, but not necessarily at that level, yet the numbers are very small in comparison to our costs, so that will not show up at all in terms of increase.
My last question, if I may. To what extent has Amtrak been helpful in the process to date? Because I see you include them in the steering committee. Is that something that you think will be helpful?
As time passed on, Amtrak got better and better in cooperating with us. We have monthly meetings with their top management, and they have been increasingly helpful in allowing us to move forward. So yes, it got much better than it was a few years ago.
I'd like Rick to answer as well, add into that, because part of the independent review was to take a look at the structure, the interrelationships, and the participation by all the stakeholders. Rick?
Yeah, Michael's correct. From the time we came in, which is about a year ago, the relationship between the project team out in the field and Amtrak has gotten progressively better. One of our big concerns, and one of the reasons we have recommended this steering committee, is we are concerned that the resources may not be available or may not have the priority that is necessary to complete this project in a timely manner. There's a lot of competing resources, a lot of different projects that Amtrak are working on, and what our idea is to make sure that there was an executive level person high enough in the Amtrak organization that could understand the needs of the ESA project and provide the resources necessary to keep the project moving forward on the schedule that we're recommending.
My hunch is you'll find Tony Kocher more than happy to do so.
I mean, just to embellish just a little bit, even though it brings attention to myself, there was a lot of discussion among Michael, myself, and Rick with respect to go to the organization chart, not only the executive steering committee, but the dotted line box with myself, the president of the MTA Capital Construction Committee, and the program executive, in terms of what the nature of those relationships are and why they're important. We need to assure that the person or parties that are responsible for the delivering of the project are in that mix. but the agency that is going to receive the benefit, the Long Island Railroad, is in that mix. There needs to be healthy tension among all those parties with respect to priorities, decisions, commitment of resources, with a focus on a joint delivery of this project in a much faster, as fast as we can, and cheap as we can format. I won't say it's been lacking, but going forward it will occur. There also needs to be a healthy tension between the chairman, the president of the MTACC, and the program executive along the same lines. There's an old adage, Management 101, people pay attention to that which the boss pays attention to. I have to make this a priority. It has been a priority, but it's going to be more of a commitment of my time because it requires that. This is the largest program we've ever, project we've ever delivered, and we need to do a better job in delivering it.
I ask you a question which is purely rhetorical, because my answer would be, quote, of course. I assume that there is a consensus that this project is one well worth finishing. Am I right?
Of course, but I will embellish it. If you go back to the original documents put out under the Holy Roman Empire in 1968, the highest profile project in 1968, followed up with the sinking of the 63rd Street tubes in the 70s, was completion of East Side access to a terminal at 3rd Avenue, which now has morphed to this. But it has been in the dialogue of the MTA since its inception. What it will do in terms of changing the dynamic for the Long Island Railroad customer is transformational.
Especially for customers in the East Bronx.
Next, IEC.
Yes, thank you, Mr.
Quickly.
Chairman. Very quickly. You have seen the IEC's forecast for cost and schedule earlier in the charts that were presented by Mr. Stewart. Here I want to just talk a little bit about the management review and the cost and schedule review undertaken by the independent review group headed up by Mr. Thorpe here. So the approach taken by the group consisted of a document review of thousands of documents and over 50 interviews of stakeholders who expressed their concerns on the project, how it was going, and what was going right about it as well. Out of these interviews and reviews of documents came a proposed organizational change, which you've just heard of, which increases the management focus to systems work and on project controls. Once these changes are implemented, the IEC expects that better project execution will be improved coordination between the disciplines, better communication between the project and MTC in a whole. The IEC urges timely completion of this organizational adjustment to realize the immediate benefits to the project. On cost and schedule, MTACC and the 3 independent groups named have evaluated the cost and schedule, and this in and of itself results in a greater certainty of the results, having additional groups take on these reviews. The East Side Access budget forecast numbers are mainly derived by identifying the variances of the base budget of 8.2. The IEC finds the approach valid based on the close range of the budget numbers that came out of the forecasting of $9.3 to $9.7 billion. The revised revenue service dates were derived by updating the base schedule. MTC, in its case, did it that way, and an independent schedule review was done by this supplemental independent review team, the independent engineer, and the FTA. The IEC finds both of these ways of doing it valid, and would like to point out the revenue service dates found by the SIR, the independent engineer, and the FTA are at least 14 months apart from MTA's revenue service date of September 2020. The presumed critical path through Manhattan and Systems has to still be validated. The operationally informed Harold schedule must be completed and must be verified through a Harold risk assessment to follow before we can say with any certainty that the Manhattan Systems work is the critical path. And with that, we'll conclude.
Yes, Susan.
First, I want to thank Mr. Thorpe and everybody on staff who I know worked very hard over this last year in order to get to this point. I think we've got some lessons learned here, and we'll hear more about them by the end of February in your report and in reports in March. I'm very happy to see an executive steering committee. I think that's a big step ahead and one that we should look at for other projects as well. When we get to the point of putting this into operations, and I hope some of you are still here to see that, I suggest that you add Metro North to it so that the operations flow smoothly through Grand Central Terminal, which is always a gem for us. Thank you.
Excellent point. Thank you, Susan. Next presentation is the East Side Access Readiness Projects. That's Rich Oakley and Elisa Pica. These are the projects that need to actually come into fruition to complement and enable Long Island Railroad to actually run into Grand Central.
Good afternoon. My name is Rich Oakley. I'm the Chief Program Officer for the Department of Program Management for the Long Island Railroad.
And I'm Elisa Pica, Chief Planning Officer, Long Island Railroad.
This presentation is basically an update from when we met last January on the East Side Access Readiness projects. And this focuses on the 5 projects that you see here, which are currently in our capital program, which are in various stages of planning, design, and construction. They are Jamaica Capacity Improvements Phase 1, Massapequa Pocket Track, Great Neck Pocket Track and Colonial Road Bridge, Port Washington Yard Track extensions, and the Mid-Suffolk Yard. And the total budget for this is $445.3 million, which has not changed since our last meeting. These various infrastructure improvements are system-wide. As you can see here, we have the Great Neck Pocket Track and Colonial Road Bridge, as well as the Port Washington Yard extension on the Port Wash branch. We have the Massapequa Pocket Track on the Babylon branch. The Mid-Suffolk Yard is located on the main line in Ronkonkoma. It's actually an extension of the existing yard. And, of course, Jamaica reconfiguration, which is in Jamaica, Queens. These are the infrastructure changes that are needed to bring trains to the 3 western terminals, Atlantic Terminal, Penn Station, as well as East Side access to Grand Central Terminal. In May of 2012, we presented this project to the committee. This is Jamaica Capacity Improvements Phase 1. It probably should be noted that we call it Phase 1 because it's really part of a multi-phase project which will provide continued improvements in capacity, speed, and reliability through Jamaica. The project consists of this Phase 1 is the reconfiguration of Johnson Yard, okay, which is needed to make room for this additional platform that will service Brooklyn. It's also the platform itself, which we call Platform F, which is in yellow on the display here. There's various track work as well as universal switches that are going to provide for additional parallel moves into Jamaica. We are right now have a design build contract proposals under review, and we're about to make an award. We're scheduled to make an award in February. So we're moving ahead with that design build construction of Johnson Avenue Yard, which consists of primarily a lot of the civil structural work that's necessary for this project. In the middle of this year, we will get our more force account work going on out there, and we are scheduled to have this project complete in February 2018. Of course, that's pending the results of an ongoing risk assessment that's being done by the independent engineer. Next. Okay, this is the new platform. This is Platform F. As you can see, it looks very much like the other platforms that we have. Same typical construction. It'll be ADA compliant. It'll have elevator as well as escalator access to the mezzanine. Okay, it has complete connectivity throughout. That means with the Long Island Railroad other platforms as well as New York City Transit subway service. the local buses at the street level, as well as access to the air train facility, which you see right there on the right. That glass building there is the air train facility. Next slide.
Can I ask a question before you
course,
leave
yes.
Jamaica? So, I've raised this before. This is going to be quite a change for those folks who either have A, a one-seat ride to Brooklyn, or B, an across-the-platform transfer to Brooklyn. So have you estimated how much longer somebody's trip on one of the branches to Brooklyn will now take, now that they have to go up, over, down, and wait for a shuttle train?
We haven't estimated that actual activity, but we do know that a lot of people are transferring today to access our Brooklyn service, and we're planning to have a shuttle at approximately 7.5 to 8 minute frequency, so that should speed things along in terms of their ability to get to Brooklyn. It's actually overall a nice increase in service to Brooklyn from Jamaica.
Now, you say 7.5. Obviously, in rush hour, there's more frequent service to Brooklyn than that now.
No, I believe that it's about 15 to 20 minute service today, so that should be a benefit.
I'm surprised to hear that because, you know, the track to Brooklyn now has almost a train every few minutes, and those folks don't have to get out and transfer. Or if they did, it was across the platform. So you're going to maintain a 7.5 minute frequency in the rush hours as well?
Well, yeah, that's, you know, that 7.5 hour frequency is specifically for the rush hour, so that there's a lot of fluidity to Jamaica, through Jamaica, because of the additional activity that's going on there.
Okay. So the next project is the Massapequa Pocket Track. This is the pocket track that'll be located between Massapequa Station and Massapequa Park Station. Okay, and it allows for a mid-branch turning of equipment so that we can increase our service. As you can see, it consists of switches, signal systems, etc. And we're already progressing with the construction of this work. We actually have the bridge span in place. We put it in June. Okay, so we're progressing ahead, and we're piggybacking with other outages that are taking place on Massapequa Station. Next slide. This is just a few photographs that show you where we set the bridge span in place. The project, of course, is 1,700 feet of electrified track, several switches, signal work, etc. We're moving along. We've been in construction since March, and we should have everything completed by December 2015. So we're moving along with the construction on that.
Can I ask you who's doing the construction supervising on that? Is that being done with the independent engineer, with Mr. Thorpe, with MTACC? Who's doing it?
Well, we have our own project management group, my staff, okay, which is approximately 100 people that work for me, and we do all the project management. We do a lot of the construction management ourselves. Okay, when we feel we need to have extra expertise or we need to supplement our staff, we will use consultants. Okay, but the IEC is overseeing these projects as well.
This is within LIRR.
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, we have a fairly experienced group in our company. Great Neck Pocket Track. Okay, this is an extension of the existing pocket track. We're going to add enough length for another 12 cars. It also calls for us to replace the Colonial Road Bridge, which is long overdue. It's 115 years old. It actually helps us make room for this pocket track. So we're moving along with that. And the next slide shows you a little rendering of the new bridge. You can see it's an arch structure, concrete arch structure. And we're right now, we finished up on the RFP documents. We're about to put them on the street, and we expect to have proposals in March of this year. So we're moving along with these projects. Next project is the Port Wash Yard extensions. Okay, this calls for to extend the existing yard tracks to accommodate 18 additional cars. This This is an increase in equipment capacity that allows us for additional peak service on the Port Washington branch to support East Side access. The tracks can be extended using either Long Island Railroad property or the town property, and we're right now in the process of discussing which is the best option for them. And we should have our start design by the end of this year. Mid-Suffolk Yard. Mid-Suffolk Yard will consist of up to 11 additional 12-car capacity tracks located in Ronkonkoma off the main line track. This is needed to provide for the storage, for eastbound storage of equipment. It will have the facilities for interior cleaning and all the things that are necessary for FRA equipment inspections. We recently awarded the preliminary design contract. Actually, it was awarded January 17th, so you can sense that we're moving along with that as well. And we're going to go out for an RFP design build in April of next year. And if all things go well, we should be completing the construction by January 2018. So that is the conclusion of this very brief presentation. Any questions?
Thank you. Next presentation, Michael. Oh, I see, I'm sorry. Keep forgetting.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. The Long Island Railroad forecasts a substantial completion of the East Side Access Readiness Project to be on time for the East Side Access Project. The projects are currently on time, on schedule. The budgets are expenditures to date do reflect the actual percentage of completion. The IEC facilitated a risk assessment for the Jamaica Capacity Improvement Project, Phase 1, which is the only project within this group of projects which is over $100 million. The workshop took place in November 2013. At the time, the project was at a 60% design phase. We worked closely with the Long Island Railroad to create risk logs, go over cost and schedule risks, and also create mitigation strategies. The IEC was satisfied with the workshop process, and we are currently going over initial results with the Long Island Railroad. The report should be finalized in February this year. And we are closely involved with the Long Island Railroad in the oversight of this project every step of the way. So,
Thank you. Any questions? 7 West, Michael?
Yes. The current revenue service date of June 2014 is at this point projected to be delayed. Currently working with a contract in New York City Transit to develop mitigating measures, and we expect to achieve revenue service by late summer, early fall of 2014. We'll discuss it a little later. The cost, we started, in fact, $53 million for the preliminary engineering funded by MTA, $2.1 billion subway portion of number 7 funded by the city, another $266 million for non-subway work, a total of $2,420. Currently, the project is forecasted to be completed under budget with an estimated $53 million in reserve remaining. Overall status, as some highlights, in effect, we completed 3 contracts, the tunnel stations, the building site K and L. We expect to complete building site J. We are 99.5% complete. There is some small stuff that has to be done before we declare substantial completion. And the last contract, the finishes and system, is 81% complete. Overall, 95% of the construction required for revenue service has been completed. And looking forward, 90-day look ahead, we have ahead of us the factory acceptance testing for inclined elevators, the transmission backbone system, and the ventilation fans for site J and K. We expect to commence, actually we did start the installation of escalators at this point, and the complete canopy installation at the main station entrance. The work that is required for the secondary station, that is not required for revenue service, is about 27% complete. The issue that we may have there is the fact that right now our systems contractor occupy a piece of the site, and that's the only place that we can bring down escalators and elevators. So that may delay the Site P, although this is not on revenue service. We cannot vacate it until the system contractor is going to deliver their work, the equipment down there. So that's where we are with that. When I look at the projections, in effect, we are working as planned right now. Total project is, again, we are ahead of, in terms of the dollars involved. We will see a certain amount of savings at the end of the project, and this is both for the total as well as the construction. The project schedule contingency. I just wanted to point out that we started with 0 contingency, and this was as were requested at the time by the Hudson Yard Development Corporation. We'll have 0 contingency, and we worked to that. So the current revenue service of June 14, as I said, at this point will be delayed most probably about 3 months. When you look at the project cost contingency, again, we have at this point $53 million left in balance, and the remaining contingency may be somewhat reduced due to schedule acceleration, but overall we expect to finish the project, in fact, well within the budget. We have 3 issues that I would like to bring to your attention. One is the high-rise escalators. By the way, these are, again, very long escalators, about 180 feet long, and the height is about 80 feet. They failed the factory accepted testing. At this junction, the mitigation was they passed certain tests, and the last test will have to be done after installation. They're taking the risk to dismantle if there is a problem, but they have no ability to test in the factory due to the height and the length. So that's an issue that we had to deal with. They requested in December to allow us to allow them to test it on site, and due to the fact there was no way to test it any other way, we agreed, and that was discussed, and they will do just that. They're looking to see how to expedite the work. I met with the KONE, that is the subcontractor to our major contractor, and they're looking at ways to accommodate us. The next issue is transmission backbone system. Here, again, the factory accepted testing submission was delayed by Siemens, our subcontractor. At this point, they submitted testing procedure, and that will support the revenue service, because all of the escalators and elevators have to be tested with a transmission backbone system. The elevators are special elevators. The first time in New York, probably in the United States, these are inclined elevators, 2 inclined elevators. They're being manufactured in Italy. They failed the factory accepted testing already twice. And the third one is right now, they're doing it themselves. They have to send us information on that, and we'll send the people there to again witness the test. It was not a stellar experience, and they were, in effect, they're working with us right now to accelerate their installation. That's about it.
Independent engineer.
If they fail yet again, what's Plan B?
I was going to say that I'm going to do it from Lego at home, but it not going to work that way. We know what really the issues are right now, and strangely enough, the manufacturer of the equipment is Italian, but the software is from New Jersey. So it's a real, so at this point, we're looking to see what are this, because it appears to be the software issues more than mechanical issues, and the integration of the two. So what we may do, depending on how the contractor wants to react to it, we may bring the escalators here so that the software people will be here and they work here rather than working here and then trying to send it to Italy and come back. So that will be one of the solutions that we are looking at right now.
Independent engineer?
Hi, as stated by the project, the overall budget remains at $2.42 billion. The IC is forecasting an estimate at completion of $2.34 billion with $53 million available in contingency. The IEC notes that any costs associated with schedule acceleration will reduce this contingency amount. In terms of schedule, as a result of the deferment of the installation of key system components and the start of integrated testing, the IEC is forecasting a revenue service date in the fourth quarter of 2014. The IEC would like to note that New York City Transit Plan staffing and training is based on a June 2014 revenue service date. Once the schedule is accepted to support the revised revenue service date, resource availability and cost impacts will need to be reevaluated. The overall project completion date will also need to be reevaluated as it is driven by the SIP contract, which has been impacted by the systems and finishes contract.
Tom, just one comment, because that was not really reflected because maybe you didn't have the chance to talk to them. I had a meeting with the New York City Transit regarding the PIC and how they can effectuate a starting date that is later than June, and they worked out the solution for that. And I met with Peter Caffiero and some other people.
That's the transportation pick to assign work crews for the extended service. So that's what Michael's talking about. Any questions? We now go to the MWDBE review by Michael Garner and A.M. Din.
Seconds, I promise. Thank you, Tom. We are going to give a brief overview of our MWDB results for the previous 6 months from 7/1 to 12/31. It's a very, very great story. Both the federal mentor program and the state-funded mentor program has resulted in a record number of contracts being awarded in this area. Naeem.
Thank you, Michael, Mr. Chairman. For the period July through December for our federally funded contracts, and the overall goal is for DBE participation is 17%. I'm happy to say that we almost made it to 16%. Additionally, there was some MWB participation on our federally funded projects, and that amounted to $70.9 million. For the state-funded projects, there is a goal for MBE participation of 10% and a WB participation of 10%. And for the July through December period, we met the goal, MWB goal, we achieved 10% participation, and for the WB goal, we achieved 11% participation. Additionally, for the state-funded projects, there was some additional DBE participation that amounted to almost $40 million.
Let me also add that we are going to take the mentor program model, and as I indicated earlier this morning with Chuck, we're going to look at other areas of our 5-year capital plan to see where we can focus on an increasing capacity where there are no MWDB firms in the marketplace, track signal, paratransit, et cetera, et cetera.
The overall DB participation goal is 17%.
No,
for the federal projects, and for DBE participation. And for the state-funded projects, there's a goal of 10% for MBE participation and a 10% goal for WB participation.
20% overall.
Okay. Capital program status, Craig?
In the interest of time, I would just refer you to tab 6, which has the report on commitments, completions, and funding report. I'll be glad to respond to any questions. Thank you.
Hearing none, do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Second? All those in favor? Aye.